Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Podcast. Our guest today is Sai Dhanak. Sai is the founder of Deduction, a consumer-first AI tax platform combines cutting-edge technology with human expertise to put an accountant in every American's pocket. Sai, thanks for taking the time to chat.
Thanks for having me.
Uh, you know, Before we get into the topic, do you want to give a quick introduction about yourself and your firm to our audience?
Yeah, so my name is Sai. I'm originally from the UK, kind of spent my whole life starting companies or helping grow other people's companies. Prior to this, I was the chief product officer at a company called Latch in New York, where I was oversaw hardware and software. And then after we took that company public, I started Deduction with my co-founder Jonathan Kilizak. And Deduction solves a simple problem. We want to put an accountant in every American's pocket, and we want to do so at a fraction of the price of today's accountant. We use AI. We respond to clients same day, as opposed to weeks that most people wait for their accountant to respond to. And lastly, we are proactive. And so think of us like an agentic H&R Block.
Thank you for the introduction. So, I think this is probably the first time, if I'm not wrong, that I'm having a conversation with somebody about this space, I should say, on the podcast. So I'm kind of excited to ask the questions that might be too silly for you, but just excuse a lot of my ignorance here as we go. Uh, First question: is this for businesses or for like end users, like individuals who file taxes?
Individuals who file taxes, consumers.
Okay, so that's great. I was just going to see which direction to go. So what is a simple use case, Sai? Let's say it's me, Krish, right? I run a business or my company, Snowpal, but let's say the personal side of me filing taxes, which, the company you have to do a number of times every month, sometimes by the week or whatnot. But if it's personal taxes, you just do
Yeah.
once a year. So how does it work? What are my current problems that you're addressing through your platform?
And Krish, do you have an accountant or do you use something like TurboTax?
For the personal side of my life, no, I just
Personally.
use, I can't remember, probably it's TurboTax. I reckon it is probably TurboTax, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there's two types of people in America. There's the consumers who want to do the taxes themselves. Krish, you sound like one of those people. And there's some great tools out there like TurboTax or even like Free Tax USA or Tax Act. Generally, those tools help you file your annual tax return for some price. 55% of Americans, actually the majority of Americans, 85 million people, don't want to do taxes themselves. Even if they're simple. They're just like, I don't want to deal with it. It's just boring. I don't want to sit in front of TurboTax. So what do those people do? They go out and find an accountant. And there's about 800,000 tax preparers in America who you could go to do your taxes for you. The problem is that with that market, the 800,000 tax preparers is facing kind of a huge demographic change. So 55% of those people are going to enter retirement in the next 5 years and over 80% in the next 10 years. On the flip side, very, very few people are entering that workforce. In other words, no one wants to be an accountant anymore. So the problems that those 85 million Americans and maybe a lot of your listeners will experience is three problems. Number one, most people wait weeks for a response from their CPA. Number two, they often will pay a lot of money. So average prices are $750 to $1,000. And number three, their CPAs are not proactive because they just don't have time. So we started Deduction to be the next generation tax firm for consumers. We offer same day, if not instant responses, a fraction of the price of an accountant, and we're proactive. And the way we do that is we have both AI CPAs and real CPAs working together to provide the best experience to the consumer.
Perfect. I think I get an idea here. So I'm going to, we'll spend a few minutes. We got about like 40 minutes or so. The first few minutes just for me to understand a bit more, and then we'll get into our topics,
Yeah.
just so the audience do know what we're going to talk about, at least loosely. We're going to talk about what it means to use agentic AI to tackle real issues in that space that you're talking about there, and
hmm
why TurboTax or H&R Block missed the mark in delivering answers that people actually do want, right? That's what we want to be able to actually get to. I think there's one more actually, why the next wave of AI is actually B2B, right? That's maybe we'll get to that as well. So you explain the problems there by using the product that you have. First is, what is your interface? Is this a mobile app, or do I have to do it on the web, or is it both places?
So I'll ask you one question as well, Krish, which is
Sure.
for your business, do you have an accountant?
I'm a startup, so we have to do 15 different things. Long story short, we don't have as many people to do everything we need to do, so we try to make do with whatever we do know. With a lot of that's
Okay.
the short answer to that.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask is just that 80% of people that use an accountant communicate with their accountant via email. And what we felt is that in a world of agents, why make people download an app or use a website? Why shouldn't an agent act the same way a human would? And in this industry, the way that is that you normally just call, text, or email your accountant. So our agent, our AI CPA, name is Taylor, is available to consumers via call, text, and email. So today you can just email Taylor@deduction.com and you can do your entire sort of personal accounting experience, whether it's asking questions during the year, asking for advice, or even preparing your tax return, can all be done over email, just like a normal accountant. That said, we do also have a web application. You can access that application by going to deduction.com. Think of that as sort of a ChatGPT style interface if you want more real-time communication.
You know what? This is very interesting. So maybe we'll get to the topics I listed earlier, but we might spend some time here because someone asked me not too long ago in a podcast of ours, Sai, if we had built, we have a few different products at Snowpal. One of it, the first one is a project management web application. One of them asked me, hey, Krish, if you guys were to design this today, would it look anything like it actually does look now because it was done like about 4 years ago? Or how different might it look like? My first answer, the spontaneous one, was not like it's going to be incrementally different. I was like, no, it's not going to look anything like how it does today because the way we built it 3, 4 years ago was with that mindset, right? The world had the same set of problems, but the way we addressed those problems was very, very different. So actually, it piqued my interest already when you actually said that the way we communicate with your platform primarily is through email, call, and text. So what does that experience? I want to get into the details of that, but before we get into the details, my first question is, the natural thing to for a lot of people to do is maybe build a mobile app, because the first intuitive, at least to my mind, I was like, you know what, yeah, sure, you said it's going to be with you at all times. My initial thought was maybe it's going to be a mobile app, for instance, or perhaps if it's more complex and you need more real estate, you'll go to the web interface. What were some of those initial determining factors to you
Yeah,
folks where you made, was it mostly a consumer? I'm pretty sure it was a consumer driven decision, but was the
yeah,
amount of money to be spent in building these interfaces and perhaps how more affordable doing it the way, I'm assuming, I'm being presumptuous here, doing it the way
sure, sure.
you've done it, did that play a role or did it not play a role? Just a couple of questions there.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll take credit for the fact that it was definitely the more fiscally responsible thing to do is like not make a mobile app, but I wouldn't say that was the primary decision. The primary decision was simply, you know, who downloads apps anymore? It's to put it bluntly, um, aside from like gaming apps, people don't download apps as much anymore. They don't want to download apps. So the app heyday kind of happened, and I was part of that amazing wave back in, the 2010s and whatnot. But I think so that was number one, is that, why make people have to learn a new UX pattern? You already have like you may have like a Robinhood app, you may have a different app. Now you have to learn this other app to do your taxes. And I felt like that was, learning UX patterns it's its own consumer friction. So that was like number two reason. And then number three was kind of more first principles, which is if it, the real promise of agents is what? It is that you can hand a task and the agent will go off and do that task and come back to you and tell you when it's done or ask you for any help or like questions. If that is the promise of agents, then we have to rethink the UX, because most UX, like apps, are built more for the user to be doing the job. But if an agent is going to be doing the job, then I was not convinced that an app was the right UX anymore. And so that's why we wanted to do something that was actually more of a kind of a human interaction of like a call, text, and email. Having said that, there are situations where you do want some lightweight UX, and so I don't want to come across as totally anti traditional UX, because a lot of people will say chat is also limited, and just email is limited. And so it's just about balancing, but in our case, we've heavily tilted towards human channels versus artificial interfaces like an app.
It makes sense. During the remaining 30, 40 minutes, I'm going to agree with things that I agree with, and I'm going to also disagree with things I might agree with, just to hear both sides of the story, right? Not because
Yeah, I
I
like it.
personally may or may not disagree,
Sure.
but so let's say a couple of things you mentioned there. I've heard this who downloads an app anymore, and I can see that, but I think the App Store downloads have not decreased. If I'm not wrong, don't quote me on this. In the
Yeah.
last few years, the number of downloads has continued to increase on the App Store, right? So something to bear in
Yeah.
mind, but I completely hear your side of that story, which makes sense. But let me get to it further. So here is the experience, right? Let's step back here. Your first question was, Krish, do you do the accounting yourself, or the tax submission, or do you go with an accountant? Even for the folks who actually do, like the 85 million Americans that you mentioned, Sai, just to establish the problem domain here, do those people have continuous interactions with the accountants during the course of the year, or do they just see the accountant like once a year, 2 weeks before, a month before they file taxes and produce all the documents that's needed?
Yeah. So, your the human touch point is important. Generally, what we find is that people want, when they first join, they want like a 10-15 minute onboarding, which is something that we think is really important. But once that has been established, we found that people don't need a call or any kind of like high touch. They just want to know that there are humans in the loop that are checking the AI's work, also like contributing something to the service, and ultimately signing the return.
Sure. Sorry, my question was more like, do these people you mentioned, being proactive? I was under the impression that even folks who actually go to an accountant to actually file taxes only ever showed up at that office at H&R Block a month or so before taxes were
True.
due. For the rest
Yeah.
of the year, they didn't have any interactions. But with your platform, is the expectation that they be proactive, meaning constantly in touch with the platform during the course of the year, or is it still going to be just the last leg of when they are about to file taxes?
Yeah, it's definitely all year round. And, there is a balance to it. We don't expect people to use it every day. That's another reason with the app decision, by the way, is, we don't expect people to have tax questions every single day. But we do at least expect from an accountant a quarterly check-in. So with deduction, you should expect that you will have a quarterly check-in. It may just be as simple as an email sent to you saying, hey, this is the latest on you. Make sure you do XYZ, contribute to your 401k, etc. But that's the behavior that we're flipping. Exactly what you're saying is most people today only interact with their accountant in March. We want to make sure it's at least 3 to 4 times a year.
Makes sense. And I think you kind of answered my question there. The reason I was trying to call out for that is a lot of times people end up building these interfaces, whether it's web or mobile or whatnot, without actually questioning the need for what they need to be doing, right? In your example, taxes, it's something that you do once a year, perhaps 4 times you have some interaction, but really from an IRS standpoint, you only have to be doing it by April 15th of the following year, right? So it
Yep.
makes less sense, I agree with you, to have these full-blown platforms, because you're not going to have that much interaction. If I'm only going to open my app like 4 times a year, should I even be building one to begin with, right? So it's a fair question to ask. Would you have done, before you get to the next part, given that as a requirement, right? So I recognize that. Would you have chosen the same way to interact even in the pre AI days? Or if you were to have launched this perhaps 2, 3 years ago, would your decisions have been slightly different?
It's a really thoughtful question. I would say I wouldn't have started this company.
Okay, the problem would
Um,
have been different, right? It'd be a different problem altogether, which makes sense.
yeah, I don't think you could solve these problems without having the AI technology option. Um, you could definitely go build a TurboTax competitor, but replacing human labor, or let's say filling in for human labor, I don't think we would have been able to justify that. So I guess that's a little bit of a cop out. Let me answer your question. If I was forced to start this company a few years ago, um, I think I'm just thinking through. I think we probably still, I would still not invest in an app. And I'll tell you, aside from the reasons I already told you, there's two other important reasons. I sort of mentioned it, but when we don't expect constant usage, two problems arise. One is never underestimate the headache of forgotten passwords. It's the ultimate user frustration. It's the ultimate customer support problem. Obviously, there's really nice ways to solve it, like magic links, but I guarantee a lot of your listeners, probably 20% of support tickets are forgotten password issues. The second issue is a lot of phones now, if you don't use an app for a certain amount of time, it offboards the app. So iOS does this quite often. I don't know what percentage this is of users, but I know it happens to me. And so I would guarantee you that the deduction app would probably get offboarded and you'd have to like reboard it every single quarter. So I think I would do the same thing. I would just have to get a little bit more creative if I didn't have the option to use AI.
No, I like your answer because it's coming from a place of solving the core problem that the customer has, as opposed to pushing your engineering ideas and interests onto the customer. And I say this, being guilty of the latter many a times as an
Same.
engineering founder. A lot of times you end up doing something because you think you'll enjoy doing it, and you sort of exacerbate the problem as you see it. And maybe the problem is not as bad to the end consumer, so to speak. So it makes complete sense. In your case, you're like, hey, there is a problem, there are some technologies available to solving these problems the way you deem appropriate in this day and age. So let me go down that route. Before we wrap up that part of the conversation, you also mentioned that there is still a user interface, and you mentioned it's a chat GPT like interface, right? So that was actually, when someone asked me the question as to how might you have a Snowpal web app today, I told them that it would not be a dashboard that welcomes you. It would be like one of those, chat GPT type of interfaces where you actually are prompted to tell us what you want to be doing today so we can respond to that. So I'm presuming when you go to deduction.com, how do you tie in? Like, in other words, I have an
Yeah.
email. I'm sending my email to this email address.
Yeah.
I'm presuming I have to sign up on your web platform as well, correct?
Yes. Yeah. The same email that you email the agent is the same email that is going to be your login to
Perfect.
our,
Okay. So I
yeah.
use an email to sign up there, and which means I don't have to go to the web, or is the expectation that I sign up first on the web and then use the email?
You do need to sign up first.
Okay, so which means you still have this dependency, right, on this web interface, correct? Fair enough. So you sign up. Sorry,
Yeah.
you're going to say something?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, let's say if any of your listeners right now, they could email Taylor at deduction, Taylor at deduction.com right now without an account. The agent will email them back explaining how to create an account. And that will, as you say, it'll point them to the web because we are thinking about it. We haven't found, well, actually, it's not found. We haven't yet implemented a authentication through email, but we are actually going to add that. But anyway, for now, you
Okay,
do have to go to the website. In a few months, you actually won't even have to go to the website. We will actually be able to create your account through email,
sure.
roughly. Um, but yes, you go to the website, you sign up. Once you sign up, you can actually go back to email. We don't require you to do anything really further. However, there are some like lightweight things that like a web application is really good for. And I mentioned that it's ChatGPT like. At the same time, the chat modality also has its limitations. So just to give you a really tangible example, like one of the most like requested things that we get during tax season is what's the status of my tax return? It's one of the most common questions. Now, a lot of people just email the agent. The agent will email back saying, "Hey, Krish, it's currently under CPA review, nothing to worry about." However, some users go to some users go to our web application, and instead of a text response, we just show you a sort of subway line of like where you're at in the journey. And that's a visual. 70% of human cognition is visual. Sometimes we decide that instead of a text, actually like a visual is going to be better. So um, that's the beauty of the web application versus email.
Okay. You have to take my word for this, Sai. I promise you. In our podcast, we don't talk a whole lot about the products themselves, not our products here necessarily, or the products of the guests who show up, because we focus on the conversation that's around the product, but not that. But I'm asking you a lot more because this is very interesting to me, right? The approach is interesting, right? And it's not every day that I'm talking to somebody who actually has an interface that's predominantly, even in this day and age, a lot of people I talk to, including ourselves, it's heavily dependent on either a mobile app or a web app or a backend system or whatnot, right? Which is why
Yeah.
your approach is intriguing and it's very interesting to me. So thanks for humoring my questions there. So
Yeah.
as we dig deeper into this, so and I'm asking this not necessarily just with your platform in mind. So feel free to answer this specifically with deduction in mind, or you can answer this more generically as well, right? That's more power to you. However, you want to answer the rest of these
Sure.
questions. But I think your example might be as good as any. Now, you mentioned that we can either send an email or go sign up, use the same email, and start these interactions. When I go to deduction.com after I've done this or before I've done this, am I expected? I mean, can I choose the platform that I want to do my interactions on? Like, in other words, if I'm like, you know what, I know the email is great, but let me just stick to the web. Can I do it? Or is the expectation that you use a combination of both?
You can do whatever you want. You can start on email, finish on chat, start an email, go to chat, go back to email. It's basically, we. I don't know. This is like a somewhat more technical podcast. It's like we think of them as threaded conversations, and the conversation can move from email to chat or back and forth.
Okay, so either, in other words, I can get my entire tax preparation and submission work done in entirety just by email without ever going. I
Correct.
mean, I log in through the web, but after that, I don't ever have to go there. Or I could go to the web and never ever send an email and still get everything done, right?
Yeah. The only caveat I make is that how you send your documents is important, and email is not the most secure. And so we do generally recommend, like, if you're going to give documents, you should just upload them through the web application. That said, a lot of people just like to email the documents to the agent. So, Krish, you're totally correct. You can do everything via email. We just recommend that sensitive documents are uploaded through the web app.
You read my mind there. So I'm going to skip my next question with the documents
Okay.
and go to the one after that.
Okay.
So the next question I have there is, all of this relates to how you're approaching this interface, right? That's my interest, right? And just trying to
Yes.
understand this because more people are going to be excited about that as well. So now you have a
Yeah.
thread. Let's say, as opposed to looking at the mobile app or the web app as an app, I'm looking at email. It's an app as well, but I'm looking at
Yeah.
email and the thread as the way to primarily interact in this example. So when I'm going to one place, the email, and then to the web, for instance, how does this get structured? I mean, how do I see all of my conversations? Let's say I sent 30 different emails, right, during the last 3 months or so. How is that organized? Do you have an interface that presents emails, but except it's on the web form?
Yeah, so it's funny, we thought about this quite a bit, but just the same way that if you go to ChatGPT or Claude, you kind of have your list of conversations, we do the same thing. So if you have 30 email threads going with the agent, you'll have 30 conversations in the web application, which we call the vault, by the way. So that's where you would see those conversations.
Okay. So anytime I send an email, that becomes a new thread on this, right, on the ChatGPT like interface. And if I respond to that, if I type something into that particular thread, do I have an interaction on the emails front as well?
We don't do that just because it would get really annoying. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to get deeper into the
No, I
actual
like it. I know
interface.
you have the
Yeah.
technical mind. I can tell
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
piecing together how this works.
This makes sense because there is an interest in moving not entirely off of mobile. Like, as we are working on our next product, for instance, at
Yeah.
Snowpal Sai, we always ask ourselves a question, right? What might be the best way to solving that next problem? And I
Yeah.
completely appreciate the fact that you've taken this, hey, no, I'm not going to do it the same way I've done it because I've done it some other ways in the past. This is a new problem. This is a new set of customers. So we're going to take a completely unique approach, right? It's a beautiful way to look at it. A lot of times, not everybody ends up doing it. And again, one more time, I'm guilty as charged. You have this muscle memory of having done things a certain way, whether you're coding or designing, and you sort of make that mistake even if you did not want to, right? So that's why I'm
Yeah.
trying to get these. Okay, so now I have all of these threads.
And I just
Sorry, go
had
ahead.
yeah, I appreciate everything you're saying. The only other thing I'll add, which is not deduction related, is I think Slack is a really another underrated interface for agents. And I'm seeing a lot of B2B companies who are starting to build almost like 90% of their experience is a Slack agent that that's how users interact. They just Slack the agent, hey, create this ticket for me, or tell me what the latest project status is for this. And again, why? Because a Slack agent is basically like just like another employee. And, so yeah, I'm just saying, like, if I were to start a B2B company today, depending on what it was, I think one of the things I would invest in heavily, I think again, you would need a web application for certain situations, but I would try and figure out, could I deliver the outcome to the end user 90% through Slack, for example, or Teams?
That's a very gracious shout out to Salesforce because given how their stock's been performing, more people creating this, I think will actually help the cause, right? Absolutely. Uh, okay, so back to what I was saying there. So we have these
Yeah.
threads, and let's say you're filing taxes for 2025, right? And then 2026 and 27. The interface, is it going to be categorized or sectionalized by the year, or is it going to be a flat list of all threads?
Really good question. Honestly, right now it's just a flat list.
Okay, and let's stick to 1 year. Let's say it's 2025. Let's say I'm filing taxes for 2025, which is what everybody's going to be getting ready for, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
2025, and I have a bunch of different threads. And I've asked a number of different questions. I may have asked the same question more than once, or I may have asked unique questions. After I've asked those questions over a certain period of time, I myself, as the asker, if there's such a word in English, of those questions, right? I don't quite remember these questions. What if I want to get a synopsis of what I've actually been asked and told? How do I look at that? How do I get a sense of that?
Yeah. So one thing we are going to be adding, and this was, I won't name names, but this was an amazing bit of feedback from one of our clients, was it would be great to just be able to quickly see all of the conclusions or decisions that were made over the history of working with Taylor, our AI CPA. And so kind of what you're getting at is like, instead of what you want to do is not you almost want to preempt the question. You don't want Krish to ask the same question 5 times. What you actually want to do is show Krish these are all the conclusions and decisions we've already made. You don't need to re-ask the same question. We've already decided that you should file as an S corp, for example. So it's something that we're working on where you can basically see here are all the decisions. It's like a decision log. And I think that would be a better solution than because that would solve the root problem, which is you're asking the same question over and over again.
Okay. I'm not a product manager, but I play that role for a lot of the work we do as well.
Okay.
So I can think of like 10 other requirements as I'm talking to you here.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting to with those questions, right? I want to be able to search for what I did, what
Yeah.
I asked somebody, for instance, as the need for all of this increases, Sai, would you actually fear that you might end up in a situation where you actually did not want to build this full-blown app that did everything, but now you've actually ended up in that place where you didn't want to be when you got started?
I think you're exactly correct. And I don't have a good answer for it today. I think it's going to be a balancing act. And I think it's also going to come down to the classic prioritization problem that all product people face, which is, am I prioritizing this use case, which is search, or am I going to prioritize, you know, autonomy in this area or payments or whatever? So yes, it is a concern, and it's one of those. It's probably going to be an ongoing concern.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. We have about 15, 20 minutes to go
Cool.
to the technology stack per se, right? Can you share with us some of what powers your system, like top to bottom, front to back, however you want to call out for those things?
Yeah, so we fundamentally based the architecture on TypeScript and obviously like a bit of Python. And as I mentioned, like if I had to break down the fundamental infrastructure, um, on the one hand, we have kind of your typical web application. S- on the other hand, we have quite a sophisticated email infrastructure. We use different service providers like SendGrid and Twilio. Um, and then on the agent side, we use a number of different tools. Some of them are proprietary, some of them are not. It's probably helpful for your listeners, as I know, this is quite a technical audience, which is, we found a lot of success using multi-agent orchestration tools like Mastra. Um, but we've also had to build a lot of stuff ourselves. So to give you an example, and this is a whole other tangent topic, which happy to go into with you, but one of the biggest things we've learned is the need for agent evaluation tools. And there are a lot of out of the box tools, but we have an amazing AI engineer who's done this quite a few times. And generally, our decision was we were going to build our own evaluation platform, meaning we have our own subject matter experts, right? Which is our CPA team. How do they evaluate the agent's behavior, whether it's preparing a tax return, whether it's answering a tax question? And so we've actually built our own platform. It's another web application. It's internal only, but we've actually built that from the ground up, and it basically allows us to control the user experience for our internal humans in the loop. And so hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. I guess the last thing I'll just finish on is our agent has a classic kind of architecture, although I will say that this is all changing every month almost. But we use an agent that has multiple different tools, various different memory. We do a little bit of multi-agent architecture, but actually we've found much more success in not having multiple agents doing loads of things at the same time, but actually more of a linear process.
Okay, and we can get into the details, the weeds of the technicalities here, or the technologies to the extent that you want to, right? The things you don't want to share, I totally understand that. So, are you on like one of these hyperscalers? Like, what cloud provider do you guys use?
GCP.
Okay, so like within GCP, any particular AI tools and products that Google's providing that you're are actually using a lot more than others?
All I'll say is that we tend to use many different providers. We do use Gemini for different things. We use different GCP tools for different things. We use OpenAI. We've occasionally used Anthropic. So yeah, I would say we use whatever's the best tool at hand. We found that Gemini, for example, is a very cost efficient way to do more lower level AI tasks. We found OpenAI to be good for more of the high level tasks. We found Anthropic to be very, very good at more of communication, copywriting. So that's kind of, I guess, some of the things that we've used.
Okay, I didn't hear AWS in there.
We don't use
Amazon's going through
AWS.
a, yeah, the reason I ask is, they reported earnings like, we also do a finance version of our podcast because we are building a
Nice.
fintech API. So that is why there is that interest in a little bit of that side of the world as well. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
they've had a pretty rough 5 years, I should say, right? Amazon's company has only gone up 25% or so in the last 5 years, and they've
Hmm.
lagged a lot behind the S&P and every other index that you can think of. And they're down like 12% in the last 12 months. So my just question, was there a reason that you were like, is it because you've used Google Cloud in the past and you're like, hey, that's typically the place I go to? Or was it like you didn't find what you were looking for on AWS for what you're trying to do here?
Yes, and I think my co-founder and CTO will have even more reasons. I would say the primary reasons were, look, I think our experience at Latch, which was the prior company, was we used AWS and we started to use GCP. And I think our what we realized was that GCP over the last few years has caught up quite a lot with AWS. So
Even
sort
when you
of
talk about market share, they've caught up. Like Azure's caught up quite a bit. Just for
right.
anybody who's interested, I think AWS
Yeah.
had like 50% market share about 7 years ago. It's down to like about 37, 38%, right? So you're spot
Yeah.
on there. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So in some ways you can sort of think of these cloud providers as a somewhat commodity. And so then you're kind of down to some very few small things that tip the scales. For us, one of them was like, look, we're already using Google Workspace. And so, let's just kind of use the same platform. The second thing was we did want to use Gemini. And, there's a lot of startup offers currently from Google and a lot of other folks. And so, I think that was the reason. I think we just felt like we were already going to be using Google for these other two major areas, AI and workspace. So why wouldn't we just use the cloud provider as well?
Sure. So we have like about 10 minutes. Let me ask a bunch of questions and can answer them as quickly as you can so we
Let's
can
do
get
it.
through. And it's not written down, so it's whatever I can think of while I'm asking these questions. So,
Okay.
let's say your architecture is different from what you said you would have had, like say 3 years ago, which means your team is going to be a reflection of your architecture. Can you talk through what your team's composition looks like from a
Yeah.
development standpoint? Are you hiring developers in general? Are you like, what? I can hire product managers and have them wipe code their way into production software. What is your mindset, or how do you go about it actually?
It's nothing quite as radical as that. Maybe that is at some point in the future. I would say the difference is now, instead of hiring six full-time onshore US engineers, you know, three front end, three back end, now you can have, let's say, two to three really amazing engineers here in the US that are able to use, I wouldn't say vibe code, but are able to use AI to kind of double their output. And then you can leverage maybe a few offshore contractors for some of the more, let's say, less sophisticated, boring infrastructure type engineering. And then the biggest change is front end. Because front end engineering now, I think, can be done with maybe a half part-time engineer who's again using I do think the big change there will be I expect we have a contractor product designer. With some of the tools I'm seeing now, they should be able to go from Figma to code without even needing a front end engineer at all. So that's what I would say would be the difference between our team 3, 4 years ago and now.
Okay. One of the other things I want to ask is, let's say if I were a backend developer, right, or a developer of some kind in the team. Earlier, 3 years ago, people would give me requirements written in plain English, right? The business team would give it to us and say, here, you go do stuff. Do you see that change, Sai, where you're at the point where that team or that product manager is actually able to use a lot of these AI tools like vibe coding and whatnot? So what they're giving is not documents written in English, but they actually give working software that are maybe half baked, but regardless, they are functional.
I would say for big things, big ideas, big initiatives. Yes, vibe coding the prototype is what we're seeing in our company. Either a product manager will vibe code it, but actually we're seeing engineers who now sort of feel a lot more empowered on the product side because they can just iterate and build so quickly. We're seeing our own engineers who hear customer feedback vibe code an application and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" So that's for the big stuff. For the smaller stuff, we still do a little bit of documentation, but I wouldn't say we haven't built a full PRD ever, and that's a big change from 3, 4 years ago when I was a chief product officer, where we'd write these like 6, 7 page PRDs. You just don't really need to do that anymore. I think for like most things.
And are there roles that you've seen disappear, like roles that would be there? Like, for instance, would you hire a
Yeah,
tester, a full time tester today?
that is a fantastic question. Um, I don't think I would hire a full-time QA today. Um, Claude can do pretty incredible QA. We actually built our own agentic PR. agent to basically do pull request, approval and denial, and then we have another engineer just check the agent's PR approval or denial. Um, so I think QA probably, again, I don't want to say it's going away. I just think it's not as critical for most companies. Front end engineering, I think, again, not going away, but like way less need for it now. Um, I think the last one I would just say is the ratio of engineers to product manager is going to change dramatically. So when I was at CPO, it was about 6 to 9 engineers per product manager. I think you're probably going to see like an order of magnitude difference. I think you may have like, Linear has 50 engineers per product manager.
Wow.
So I don't know. That's pretty radical, but I think that's like we almost are subscribing to that idea.
So, sorry, does that mean you need fewer product managers than you needed in the
Correct.
past?
Correct.
Wow. Okay.
I still think product is super critical, but given all these tools, it's creating so much leverage for individual people. A product manager should now be able to manage many more engineers. Is kind of the idea.
Okay. And then, say 2, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe I don't know, even 3 years ago, you would hire somebody who has a certain skill in a language, in a framework, in a library of a certain version. Now, is that important? When you're looking to hire somebody, are you worried about them knowing Python versus TypeScript? Or are you looking for a good engineer who actually is language agnostic because the tool can actually write a lot of the code? So they need to be solving problems better than actually writing code better.
It depends on the stage of the company. We don't have time to, I still think people like need some coaching. If it's a brand new language, they can't just like vibe code the whole thing. Like they need to understand some of the language. We just don't have time right now given how fast we're moving. So as an early stage company, we do look for the language experience. That said, for some people who are really exceptional, we will make an exception. I think down the line, we will not require it and happy to kind of just like offer on the job training as needed.
What percentage do you think of your code is human written versus generated as we speak now?
I really don't know the answer to that. I'm gonna go now find that out because I'm very interested to know. Um, I don't know. I mean, I would suspect probably in the 50% range, if not more. And I'll tell you maybe a more interesting fact, which is a lot of our team will have the AI coding agents run overnight as well as during the day, and they'll have multiple agents running at the same time. So effectively, they have multiple engineers, virtual engineers working 24/7 for them. So it's probably more than 50%, to be honest.
Okay. I have a lot more questions, but I know we've run out of time here. So do you have any questions for me?
Uh, I do as well, but just in the short amount of time, Krish, what is your I guess like what is your prediction for kind of you know how these agents are going to evolve, especially in as an engineer yourself?
Funny you
Oh,
should
let me
ask.
put it this. Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah. Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no, no.
No, I was going to do, I usually do a recap of all of my conversations through a solo podcast. I was going to do one today to answer that very question. So definitely do watch out for that. But I'll
Okay.
answer this quickly in the next 2 minutes, right? Um, I think development has changed dramatically, right? It was never, I mean, software engineering was never one of those things that was boring ever, where you did the same thing every year. Hopefully you did not. If you did, sorry for you. But, in the last year or so, maybe 2 years, I think the whole fundamental approach to engineering has changed, right? Right from what you're building, like you mentioned, to how you're building it, what your interfaces are going to look like, what your stack's going to look like, or whether or not you're going to use one of these big providers, right? The reason I asked you, Sai, about the providers, one of the reasons I'm reading that AWS is having a tough time is people are not going to one of these three big hyperscalers anymore. There are a lot of other AI ways of hosting your software. They could be smaller companies, right? Like Neo Clouds, for instance, that a lot of companies are resorting to. So it's not a
Mm,
default like I go to AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud anymore. There are a lot of options available as we speak. So right from architecture to design, development, the whole SDLC is got to look so different that my only advice to people and even to our own selves here is, if we did anything the same way that we've done in the past because of muscle memory, that's a big problem, right? You're gonna have to be like, you know
Mm,
what, we're doing it because we did it something like this in the past, and that's not no good reason. It's actually a reason to not do it that way, right? So I think everyone's going to have to step back and digest the changes that are happening, because a lot of times you're at work, you are given a certain task and you live life, you have 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 or whatever that window of time is, and you never really catch up with what's happening, right? That seems to be the privilege of people running companies. But I think that shouldn't be the case, right? You need to democratize the
mm,
learning, so everybody, even somebody who's reporting or making sandwiches for a living today, needs to understand the progress and the changes that are happening in this space, so they can also actually make a lot more money and have a more fruitful life. Then I didn't
mm.
intend for that to be a philosophical answer. It just ended up being one. My
I,
apologies there, but
I,
yeah.
I love a philosophical answer, but thank you for answering it.
My very last question to you, Sai, is what is your
Yeah.
favorite food, comfort food? What's your one dish? If you got to name one dish that you like to eat, what is it?
Yeah. So I'm from India, and so I love Indian street food. And there's a specific dish called vada pav, which is basically fried potato burger, and it's very spicy in a white bun. And yeah, hopefully people can check that out if they haven't had it before.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say, Krish, thanks so much for having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for your time. We talked to Sai Dhanak, the CEO and co-founder of Deduction. Definitely do check out. I'm going to include the link to Sai's LinkedIn profile and the link to deduction.com. And the tax season is around the corner, so this is as good a time as any to have this conversation. Until next time, Sai, thank you.
Thank you.